Hello, today's AP Euro lecture is on religion in the 19th century going into the 20th century. It's kind of a catch-all. It seems to me that in the first semester, I talked a lot about religion. We talked a lot about religion with the Reformation and the Enlightenment and so on. And it seems like to me in the second semester we don't really speak very much about religion because it is waning in importance. It's waning in influence, especially with the intellectual elite. But we keep coming back to it, and there are people who are politically religious or religiously political, and there are ideas that come up against religion that very religious people defend their own beliefs against, and so it still seems to me to be a very important part of the European history story until really after World War II. I know this is a lot, but this is my extreme contextualization, and then moving into, I guess, the beginnings of the thesis of the day. Let me take you back to the Enlightenment and tell you that the Enlightenment was the first strike against religion, thinking that reason, rationality, is what one should use in order to explain or come up with systems of government and education and criminal justice and so on, instead of faith, which underlies religion. It is really the first strike against religion that we've seen. When you go back to the Protestant Reformation, for example, it's an intensification of religion, actually, or religious belief, both by Catholics and Protestants. We talked recently about Darwin's ideas and how Darwin's ideas strike at religion, not just the idea that man evolved from lower species, let's say, but also Darwin comes up with these ideas that religion is actually created by man as a kind of survival mechanism as well. Marx's ideas strike at religion. You might remember that Marx describes religion as the opiate of the masses. It is one of these economically determined things that helps the exploiter class stay in power. We also, in the 19th century, had archaeology and geology and textual criticism of the Bible, trying to seek the truth about biblical times. They're trying to look for, the city of Jericho and find out if Jericho actually did have walls that crumbled. When they look at geology and they start to see that the world seems to be much older than just a few thousand years, looking at striations in the earth and volcanic activity and giant canyons, uh, fossils of all different kinds, you can understand that people start to say, well, this is a much older planet than just 8,000 years ago God created Adam and Eve. Textual criticism of the Bible too shows that the Bible is not written by God, but it's written by men, and different men at different times for whatever kinds of reasons that they needed at that point in time. So these are all things that, for people who are open-minded and people who are maybe more apt to question, kind of like in the Enlightenment, they're going to start to doubt religion and maybe even become atheists. Psychology could also strike at religion. We'll look very soon at the psychology of Sigmund Freud and others like Wilhelm Wundt and Ivan Pavlov. It seems like we are not so much in control of ourselves, and that there are forces beyond just free will that control our behavior. And so the question of, what is a sin? Do you have the choice to sin or not to sin? And really, is God just a kind of mental coping mechanism for life? The psychology starts to call into question religion as well. Also, urbanization that we've seen going on from the very beginning times of industrialization, where people are moving away from their locale, from their village perhaps, and moving into a large city. In their village, they were under close supervision, so to speak, or watch of the local clergy. And now that they're living in a city that doesn't maybe have the clergy to serve them or the churches to serve them, or maybe going to church is no longer a habit or a tradition that they do, it certainly is going to reduce the bonds between religion and the masses, especially the lower classes, who might be completely exhausted on Sunday after working 6 days and not really want to go and spend time at church. Philosophy could strike at religion. We'll talk a little bit about that today. And then, of course, governments could oppose the power of the church as well. We've seen that going on forever. Sometimes the government, forced religion upon people, but other times there were religious minorities who opposed governments, and governments were trying to control them and so on. So we have kind of a mixed bag there of the church under attack or Christianity under siege. There's a guy by the name of Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is a name that needs to be learned to spell like bourgeoisie. It's perhaps even more difficult. But he's a German philosopher, lives in the second half of the 19th century, tragically dies young, probably from syphilis. But he is a very controversial figure and has a lot of great quotes. In fact, there is I have to I have to tell you this. There is a website that combines Family Circus, if you know the Family Circus cartoons, with Nietzsche quotes, and sometimes they are just really, really funny. So you might want to check that out. I think it's called Nietzsche Family Circus. Enjoy. You heard it here first. But Nietzsche is famous in many respects for his attacks on Christianity in the latter half of the 19th century. And one of his most famous quotes is "God is dead," and this comes from a book called "Thus Spake Zarathustra," or "Also sprach Zarathustra" in German. And the idea, once again, is that man has overcome the need to create a god or to live with a god, since man created God. And in this book, he's talking about really underlying thesis of his, which is that the will to power is really the most important instinct. I suppose Christianity might tell you that love or loving others is the most important instinct, but Nietzsche is going against that with this idea of the will to power, and he talks about a Superman, a kind of what they call in German an Übermensch, who is a creation of themselves through their own will, and this Superman or these supermen would create their own new ethical values or new morals in order to dominate the masses. All of that sounds a little bit scary, and it actually is, because if an individual can decide for themselves what morality is, what good and evil are, in fact, he has a book called Beyond Good and Evil, that it could lead to some pretty horrific things. And Nietzsche is one of the philosophers that underpins the Nazi movement in the 20th century. Much to his chagrin, had he been alive, but that is something that the Nazis sort of take his ideas, pervert them ever so slightly, and turn them into a bunch of anti-Semitic claptrap. Nietzsche goes on to talk about Christianity, or criticize Christianity, as kind of what Darwin and T.H. Huxley were talking about, that it is but in a much more negative way, that Christianity is a religion or philosophy for the weak, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, to keep the strong from dominating them, love your neighbor and all of that kind of stuff. And so you can understand that the very few intellectual people who gravitated towards Nietzsche really criticized the church and fell away from Christianity altogether. It's kind of a movement, once again, like many of our movements, of just a very small number of people, but nonetheless really quite important. Just as an aside, I saw some graffiti written in a bathroom at college where somebody had written, "God is dead," and then, underneath it signed Nietzsche. And then somebody else had come along and wrote, "Nietzsche's dead," and signed it God. I thought that was funny. The church strikes back at all of these things that are attacking it in the 19th century. And Pius IX is one of the popes probably that you should know. He's the guy back in 1848 who was chased off of the papal throne and chased away from his papal states for a short period of time. He returned in the 1860s. Then his papal states are in large measure stripped from him by the unification of Italy. He's very angry about that. And he lasts as pope for quite a number of years, probably 30 some years. And so in 1864, he publishes a text called the Syllabus of Errors. And he's striking at all of the 19th century ideas that many of which you and I might like, talking about rationalism, once again, reasoning your way through things rather than just having faith, and science, like Darwin, for example, and all of the isms that come from man. Liberalism comes from man, nationalism comes from man, socialism comes from man. These aren't God-given, Bible-given isms. These are new isms of fairly recent times. Civil rights, even civil rights, the church is not supporting because there is no biblical justification. There is no church justification for thinking that people should be able to vote and all of that kind of stuff. Pius really just wants people to return to a simpler time, to a more faithful time, to a time when people listen to the wisdom of the church and the wisdom of the popes, and give up all of this modern stuff. In 1870, there is a First Vatican Council. We had the Council of Trent, for example, back in the day that started the Catholic Reformation. This First Vatican Council comes up with the idea of the doctrine of papal infallibility. This seems like something from a much earlier time. What it says is that the Pope is infallible, incapable of error, if he is speaking on religious matters or matters of faith and morals. It's really pretty a pretty bold statement that the Pope can't be wrong. He's always right. Basically, God said so. God sent me here. God said so. So there's that. There's also some other things that go along with that. I think the idea of the virgin birth of Jesus and so on. It's kind of like a resurrection, pardon the pun, of old ideas come back in the late 19th century. Pius gives way to Leo XIII, another pope who is kind of his handpicked successor. And Leo has similar beliefs, but he also updates things, or he moves away from just, kind of having your arms crossed and saying, darn Italy and darn modern times, and starts to maybe kind of negotiate with ideas or negotiate with Italy, so to speak, or the existence of an Italy. He has this um, syllabus called or a text called Rerum Novarum, which deals with kind of what capitalists, liberal capitalists, were saying versus what Marxist socialists were saying, and kind of chooses the church's way of looking at this. He affirms more or less the right to private property in this Rerum Novarum, but criticizes capitalism's excesses, the creation of all of the super poor people because of capitalism, the economic insecurity of capitalism, and then also criticizes socialism. Socialism is clearly evil, saying that religion is the opiate of the masses, but the ideas of socialism, that poor people deserve dignity and poor people deserve a bigger slice of the economic pie, is often right. And so he urged the creation of Christian socialist parties, the kind that we saw happening in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in fact, or Catholics should come together and vote as a bloc for things that Catholics want. And this is really the beginning of kind of conservative but not kind of mean-spirited conservative, but sort of conservative parties that attempt to keep social conservative going, but then also um, recognize the importance of being economically fair. There are a couple. There are the two. I would say out of those two, you remember Pius the Ninth if you can, and Leo the 13th. Is kind of you can remember Leo if you want to. You know that education is for many 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 years in control of the church's hands, and it's a very important thing for the church to have control of education as much as possible. It's important for the church, but it's also important for the state. And once again, we have this clash between church and state over education. Both churches and states want to teach their youth, their young people, loyalties to the church or loyalties to the state. And so states generally wanted public education, and the church wanted to hold on to as much um, Christian or Catholic education as possible. And you see that fight going back and forth in various places in France, for example, or in Bismarck's Kulturkampf, or even in Italy. And it's just a fight that kind of rages with each side wanting more young people in their own schools. Governments too fought against the church. There was Bismarck's Kulturkampf in the 1870s trying to reduce the power of the Catholic Church, but as you know, that just created a block of politically voting Catholics in the Center Party. There is, of course, the unification of Italy at Pius IX's expense, and then the popes are very angry at Italy for a long period of time. And then, I'll remind you that the French liberals, the left-leaning Republicans, created a law separating church and state, and so that civil constitution of the clergy from the French Revolution went by the wayside, and the state is much less involved in church business, no longer paying the clergy, and trying to get as many kids as possible into state schools instead of church schools. Well, in the 20th century, or late 19th century and early 20th century, I think what you have happening is many Protestants becoming generally less religious. Some Catholics are also generally becoming less religious, but then there's also a kind of counter movement to that, where some Catholics are gravitating even more strongly towards their faith or more strongly towards their pope. They're renewing their faith, just like Pius the Ninth is telling them to. These people are called ultramontanes. It means beyond the mountains. Beyond the mountains would be Rome, and so people who are very concerned with Catholicism and very devoted to the church, politically speaking, during the storm of modern ideas and seeming church persecution, are an important part of society. Some, I don't know, 30, 40% of French people perhaps are like this. And German Catholics could be like this, for example, as well. And a number of Italians and Spanish and so on. Well, hopefully that wasn't too painful for you and you got something out of it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.